Good morning, Chris Hull, Wake Forest School of Medicine, Infectious Diseases, with our first COVID update of September. Getting a little cooler outside, feels good. Fall's coming. And we'll talk about what fall means for respiratory viruses in a minute. First, where we're at with COVID, and then we'll talk a little bit about the big news this week, the availability of a specific booster. And then we will talk about how our schools are doing, and we'll talk about what fall might bring and what we might need to do this coming fall and winter for COVID. So first, so our cases here in the Triad area, just like across most of the country, are slowly dropping. It's not really dropping quickly, but it is dropping. That includes the amount of virus in our wastewater as far as cases that are reported, and then also in hospitalizations and employee absences. That, I think, will continue to drop, albeit very slowly. Something that's going to put the brakes on it going down probably is going to be our kids in schools. Kids share viruses pretty easily in schools, particularly all the respiratory viruses, and COVID being one of them. Interestingly, we keep track at Wake Forest Baptist and of our respiratory viruses that are circulating, and we do that by looking at compilations of our testing that we do for people admitted or seen in the ED for respiratory infections. And the big viruses right now going around still are 1, COVID, 2, rhinovirus, which is a cold virus, and a little bit of adenovirus that's going around too. So those are all respiratory tract viruses. So if you don't, if you get a cold right now, cold symptoms, sore throat, a little bit of fever maybe, maybe not, runny nose, stuffy nose, and then a cough, it may be COVID or it may not be, because the other viruses are going around too. The only way to know for sure is to test. And what I would recommend for parents who have kids in school is if your child gets a cold, first of all, stay home from school. Have the child stay home from school for a day or so. That's just polite. That's just being a good citizen. And kids that are sick shouldn't be going to school. They'll recover faster staying home, and they won't spread the virus to others. And then get your child tested for COVID. If the test is positive, then you know to stay out of school for 5 days, with day 0 being the day of symptom onset. So day 1 is the day after. So if you start from when the symptoms actually start, it's 6 days you stay home. And then you wear a mask for the remainder of 10 days to keep it from spreading to other kids, but you can go back to school. If the COVID test is negative, then the child still has symptoms the next day. Stay home 1 more day from school, so that's 2 days. And then do another COVID test. If that one is also negative, then as soon as the child is feeling better, you can go back to school. If the child has residual symptoms, still with a little bit of runny nose or a little bit of cough, then to be a good citizen, wear a mask. Let's not give our germs to other people. That's being polite. So that's how to navigate that, I think. The number of patients that we have in our hospital is still staying about the same, and I expect that'll slowly drop again. We reached a peak in hospitalizations in mid-August from our current BA.5 wave. The virus circulating around is still BA.5, about almost 90%. There are a few other variants that are looking to rear ahead, but they're all subvariants of BA.4 or 5, and it remains unclear how important these are going to be as time goes on. Very early information states that they're probably not much more infectious than BA.5 itself, and that immunity acquired to BA.4 or 5 seems to protect against those viruses. So the big news this week is we call it a bivalent booster. I like the terms the fall COVID booster. So you might hear me go back interchangeably between the fall COVID booster and the bivalent booster. Sometimes I'll use both words together just to keep everyone happy. And I'll tell you why in a minute. I like the term the fall COVID booster. But that vaccine is becoming available just this week. And it's recommended as a booster for everybody. There are two companies, Pfizer, BioNTech, that has one, and Moderna has one. And I'll tell you a little bit how those are made and how they're tested and how we look at them. The Pfizer vaccine is okay because they asked the FDA for an approval down to age 12. So the Pfizer vaccine is available as a booster for anyone who's older than the age of 12. And Moderna's vaccine is available for anyone over the age of 18. If you're over the age of 18, both boosters look like in their data that they'll probably work just as well. So it doesn't really matter which one you get. So just one caveat is that if you've had a booster or your primary vaccine series within 2 months, you should wait until 2 months are up in order to get that booster, the fall COVID booster. And that's really the only hard, strict stipulation for it. So if your booster is more than 2 months ago, or your primary series more than 2 months ago, and you haven't gotten a booster since then, you can go out and rush out even as early as next week to get that fall COVID booster. For immunocompromised patients, you might want to talk to your physician who manages your immunocompromising condition. But that booster is also available for immunocompromised people. This is simplifying things some. You don't need to now be counting boosters. So, it's the old, well, I've had 3, but I'm over 50. Should I get number 4? You don't have to count anymore. It's just the fall COVID booster. The only stipulation is that you haven't had a booster within 2 months. So I get asked, what about if I've had COVID within the last recent history? So if you've had COVID since the last part of June, you've had BA.5. And so for those of you who've had test positive COVID, you know you had COVID. You had symptoms, you took a test, it was positive. You can wait a little bit to get the fall booster. How long? I wouldn't wait any more than 3 months. And it's not actually imperative that you do wait. So let's have a scenario. You got COVID in the first week of August, and you're going in to get your annual physical and see your doctor towards the end of October, and you will get your flu shot then. You're there. You're at the doctor. Might as well just get your fall COVID booster too. Flu shot in one arm, COVID booster in the other. That's why we have 2 arms, says the head of the FDA, or maybe it was the CDC. And you can do that. You can get both the fall COVID booster and your flu booster at the same time, and they still work just as well, and any adverse effects that you might have aren't amplified by doing that. It appears that booster shots, and that includes Omicron booster shots, have actually a few less side effects than the original primary vaccine series. We've known that for quite a while, but there still can be a little bit of pain, a little bit of swelling in the arm. Some people might get a fever the day afterwards. And personally, when I got my booster shot this summer, which was number 4 for me, I didn't feel anything. It was pretty easy. So let's go over a little bit how this fall booster, the bivalent booster, came about, and how it was tested, and why we think it's a good idea. First, the words bivalent means that it has two directions, bivalent. So it has a messenger RNA transcript from the original COVID virus that we used for the original vaccine, starting way back now, over a year and a half ago. And then it has a BA.4/5 transcript in it. And that's specific for the variant that's circulating now and is expected to be the main variant that we see through the fall and the winter COVID season, respiratory virus season. So it has 2 valences, the old one and then against BA.5 Omicron. So that vaccine, the way that's done is you have your vaccine particle, which basically is a way to get it in to the body and into the muscle where that messenger RNA can be transcribed into a protein, and the spike protein is made. So what you do is you take that particle and you just pull out the old snippet, and then you put in the messenger RNA component from the original vaccine. Then you put in the BA.5 messenger RNA component in there. Then it makes those proteins. So the vaccine really isn't any different, other than that the protein it makes looks a little bit more like the current circulating variant. So this is the way we do our flu shot every year. When we make flu shots, and there's 4 or 5 different flu shots out there now, the way we do it is we just change up the component of the protein that our immune system is directed at. The rest of the vaccine stays the same. And so we know then when we test the flu shot, we don't actually have to go through human trials, because all we're doing is tweaking how the protein comes out, and the protein that our immune system is directed at. It's just a tweak. So what we do is we test it in animals and mice, and then we put it in to some people and measure their antibody responses, just to make sure that it works and that the antibodies that come out are directed against the right protein, so that we think it'll work. And then, boom, we'll release the flu shot. That's how we do it every year. In fact, we've been doing it that way for a very long time, for decades. So when we're tweaking a vaccine a little bit to improve the antibody direction against a virus, we don't put it into human trials. We haven't done that for a long time. So with the BA.5 bivalent fall COVID booster, we did it the same way we do our flu shots. We look at antibody responses in animals and humans, but we don't do large human trials because it's the same vaccine. It's just tweaked a little bit. So the antibodies that come out are more directed against the circulating variant. Now, in this case, though, back last spring, we thought that we were going to be doing a bivalent vaccine against BA.1. We're getting pretty technical here. BA.1, which was the original Omicron that caused all that havoc last January and February. So as we got into March and April, we were saying, well, it looks like we're going to have to make a vaccine against that Omicron. And that one we actually did put into human trials to look at safety and efficacy, and it worked great. And it was safe, and it was tolerated exactly the same as the original vaccines were. And so we have human clinical trial experience with modifying that one. But then along came May and June, and it was, whoops, that variant's not circulating anymore. So it didn't make sense to use that vaccine because it wasn't directed against the circulating variant. So we just modified it a little bit more. There are human trials going on with both Moderna's and Pfizer's vaccine. The data should be out in 2 to 3 weeks, perhaps 4. But since it's made the same way, and it's basically the same vaccine with a tweak, the FDA approved it without it going through a human trial. And I am okay with that as an infectious disease doctor. In fact, that's how I would have recommended it be done. So everyone should consider getting the fall COVID booster this fall. So the reasons are, one is, why get sick? This is a vaccine that's actually directed against the circulating variant. So the data that we look at with antibody responses suggests that it will be a much better vaccine for preventing even mild symptomatic COVID. So if you want to get through the fall and spring respiratory virus season without getting sick from COVID, this is the booster for you. The second reason is for people who have underlying health problems who are older, this is going to be a better vaccine for protecting you from getting out of trouble. Even though the old vaccine is still doing a pretty good job for that, we're seeing people who are over the age of 70 or underlying medical problems still getting hospitalized even though they've been vaccinated with that vaccine. This vaccine should do a better job for it, just like how a modified flu vaccine does a better job keeping people out of the hospital for flu than the older vaccines do. And then lastly, this vaccine should, and it looks like it will, reduce the viral load in people who do get a, quote, breakthrough infection, or who do get COVID despite vaccination. It will reduce the viral load a lot faster so that they don't transmit it as much. And that includes in your own household. And so that's an advantage. So I recommend that everyone who's over the age of 12 get one of the 2 boosters, depending on their age, their fall COVID boosters. This is kind of a shift too in how we think and respond to COVID in North America as well as in Europe. The first shift came when we got through that big Omicron wave in January and February, when we started to realize, because of slowly increasing immunity in the population and vaccines, that we can change the way we respond to COVID. And we shifted some from individual responsibilities to not get COVID. We shifted 2 individual responsibilities to not get COVID rather than having a large community response. So, for example, rather than mask an entire city or mask an entire county, we said, if you need to mask or you want to mask to not get COVID, you can, because N95s are over 90% protective from getting COVID from somebody who has it. That's why we use them when we see COVID patients in the hospital. That was shift number 1. And then we were able to do more things because we opened up our society. You could travel more. A lot of restrictions went away. And I think that was all fine. This is the next major shift in how so this is number 2 in how we're going to take care of COVID. Rather than go through kind of a haphazard booster campaign that we kind of make up as we go, as data comes on, and that's not a criticism, but that's just how the response. We're going to shift into an annual fall COVID booster. So you get your flu shot, you get your COVID booster every fall, And just like how we tweak and change the flu shot every year to match the strains of flu that are going around, we're going to change and tweak the COVID booster so that it matches the strains of COVID that are going around. Makes sense, right? So kind of the bottom line is with this COVID booster, why would you want to go out and get last year's flu shot when there's a better matched this year's flu shot? It's going to be the same thing for COVID. I think that's really a major deal, because it means that we can just roll in our responses to COVID just like we do for other respiratory viruses that have implications, like influenza. Will we be having to get the fall COVID booster forever? I don't know. Maybe not. As that coronavirus continues to change and weaken some, maybe we won't need to, because it'll just fold itself into all the other cold and flu viruses we get. But if it stays, a fairly significant infection for vulnerable people, then I think we will keep doing it. Just like we keep doing our flu shot every year, because most people who get the flu do fine, but not everybody does, and that's why we keep doing the flu shot every year too. So just a little bit about the background on those vaccines, and as we go through the fall, I'll be giving you updated information and data on that vaccine. But I've been around this world of infectious diseases enough. I have a lot of confidence in this fall booster, both for its safety and for its efficacy. So what does that mean now with the booster and with people getting, that have gotten BA4 and 5 so far this summer? What does that mean for this fall and winter respiratory viral season? Well, initially I was thinking we were really going to get spanked by COVID in late December and January. I'm not sure it's going to be quite as bad as what I originally had predicted. I don't think it'll be nearly as bad as what we saw last winter. Some of it is because people have been getting BA4 and 5 over the summer, and that immunity should get them through the fall and winter. And if they get their booster, man, they're going to be set for the fall and winter season. I think if we have a really good turnout of people who go out and get the fall COVID booster, I think it'll really tamp down and make our winter viral season better. Nevertheless, we'll just have to keep an eye on things, and as the season goes on and we're starting to see lots and lots of cases, it may be that we'll have to pull another tool out of our anti-COVID toolbox, and that might be masks again. So right now I don't see that for where we're at now, and I really don't think the schools need to mask up. I don't think workplaces need to mask up right now unless it's required by corporate. But I can't tell you that as we get into January, if we start to see a lot of school absenteeism, workplace absenteeism, and it becomes harder for companies and schools to complete their mission. School can't get the teachers to come in because they're calling in sick. It's hard to complete the mission. Then we might have to pull the masks out. But I don't think it'll be a long-term masking. It'll be just during the time of acute stress from transmission of the virus. The other tool that we have in our toolbox, by the way, is treatment. And more and more data is showing that Paxlovid and molnupiravir work well for people who have symptomatic COVID as an outpatient, who have other underlying health problems, or who are older. and it works well to keep them out of the hospital. We actually have data now that shows it reduces mortality from COVID. So if you're older or have underlying health problems and you test positive for COVID, talk to your doctor about getting those two drugs. Generally, I would recommend Paxlovid first, molnupiravir only if you can't take Paxlovid. But we need to remember that those drugs are out there. Just data out this week shows, by the way, that Paxlovid really rapidly decreases viral shedding also in somebody who's taking it with COVID, which means they're going to transmit less virus to their household and to other people. And that's really a good thing. So, lastly, flu. Where are we at with influenza? Interestingly, and kind of under the radar screen, is influenza's been, we've seen cases all summer. In fact, some of you might know of some summer camp associated flu outbreaks that we had, not COVID, but flu. And we're still seeing some influenza a little bit. Looking at the southern hemisphere and how they did with influenza this year, it might be a little bit of a tough influenza season. And I think it'll certainly be worse than last year's. But we'll have to wait and see. There's this odd competition between COVID and an influenza that's not really all that well understood. But it seems like when you have a bad COVID year, there's not much flu. And when you have a good COVID time, there's more flu. So we'll have to see. The flu shot's out. And if I mentioned earlier, you can get the flu shot and the COVID shot at the same time, your COVID booster at the same time. And I would recommend doing that. There is treatment, just like we have Paxlovid for COVID, we have Tamiflu and Relenza for flu. And so if you are older or have other underlying medical problems, then you get the flu. I would recommend those as well. So that's what I think we'll have to wait and see. But so it's kind of interesting that as we worry a little bit less about COVID, the other viruses are kind of starting to say, "Hey, we're back," and flu is one of them. So monkeypox, where are we at with that? Cases of monkeypox across the country and also here in North Carolina are starting to decline. It's probably because the word is getting out amongst the population that's at higher risk for transmission of monkeypox, which still to date, including here in North Carolina, is men who have sex with men, particularly those who have more than one partner. And we are vaccinating, and we just increased the number of people eligible for monkeypox vaccine, and it's basically now all men who have sex with men are eligible for that vaccine. And so if you would like to get vaccinated and you're in that group, and you can talk, mostly it's the vaccines given in health departments, and in some cases, university medical centers. We're gathering data on how well our treatment, which is called Topavax, is working for monkeypox, a drug originally made for smallpox. But first anecdotal data seems that it does help, both with the pain, the duration of symptoms, and probably with viral shedding. So that's a little bit of good news on the monkeypox front. We'll have to see how and when monkeypox might enter and stay with the population, if it does, or whether it'll burn itself out. We don't know that yet. So with that, any questions? Colleagues at Spectrum or WXII? Or from our own people? Anything anyone saw on the...
We had a question here.
Mm-hmm.
What is your case for boosting without an antibody test?
A case of boosting without an antibody test? Oh, I don't think you need to have an antibody test for boost, because we wouldn't know how to interpret that antibody test anyway. we don't antibody test you for flu when we give you the annual flu booster. That's directed. So I don't think you need to test at all. Interestingly, we know now that people who've had COVID, test positive COVID, maybe once, maybe twice, can get reinfected. And that's been happening with the BA.5 because it's a little bit of a different virus. Our immune system doesn't recognize it quite as well. It kind of looks at it kind of funny and says, "Do I know you?" And so I would just get the booster. You don't need an antibody test. All right, we'll see you back here in 2 weeks, and we'll update again and see how we do as we get further into the fall season.